Good evening, and welcome back to Chill and Feel Chronicles. Before we begin tonight's journey, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Leave a comment below and join our growing community of history lovers from around the world. And if you enjoy relaxing historical documentaries that transport you back through time, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue exploring the greatest stories ever told. Now, let's travel back more than 4,000 years. As the first light of dawn spreads across the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, the mighty Euphrates River flows quietly through the land that gave birth to some of humanity's earliest civilizations. Slowly, through the morning mist, an extraordinary city comes into view. Massive walls surround magnificent palaces. Towering temples reach toward the sky. Bustling markets overflow with merchants from distant kingdoms. This is Babylon, a city whose name would echo through history for thousands of years. But how did one city become the center of the ancient world? Was Babylon truly the richest city ever built? Did the legendary Hanging Gardens really exist, or were they simply a beautiful myth? And why did one of history's most powerful civilizations eventually disappear? For centuries, Babylon has inspired wonder, mystery, and countless legends. Behind every towering wall and every ancient inscription lies a remarkable story of ambition, innovation, conquest, and human achievement. Tonight, we will follow Babylon's incredible journey from a small settlement beside the Euphrates River to the dazzling capital of a vast empire that shaped the course of history. Together, we'll uncover the truth behind its greatest legends and explore how this magnificent city rose to unimaginable glory before gradually fading into the sands of time. So settle in, relax, and let our journey into the legendary city of Babylon begin. Long before Babylon became the most celebrated city of the ancient world, before its kings commanded vast armies and its towering walls inspired awe across distant kingdoms, there was a land shaped by two remarkable rivers. This region, known today as Mesopotamia, stretched between the Tigris and the Euphrates, whose seasonal floods transformed an otherwise harsh landscape into one of the most fertile places on earth. The name Mesopotamia comes from ancient Greek and simply means the land between two rivers. Yet those few words describe one of the most important regions in human history. Unlike civilizations that depended on rainfall alone, the people living here learned to harness the waters of the Tigris and the Euphrates. Every year, the rivers deposited rich layers of fertile silt across the plains, creating ideal conditions for farming. Life was not always easy. The floods could be unpredictable, sometimes arriving too early, too late, or with devastating force. But rather than abandoning the land, its people adapted. They dug canals, built levees, and developed irrigation systems that carried water far beyond the riverbanks. Through cooperation and careful planning, they transformed the landscape into thriving farmland capable of supporting growing communities. As agriculture became more productive, villages gradually expanded into towns, and towns evolved into the world's earliest cities. This transformation marked one of the greatest turning points in human history. For the first time, large populations could settle permanently, specialize in different occupations, and create organized societies. Farmers, craftsmen, merchants, priests, and rulers each played distinct roles, allowing civilization to flourish in ways never seen before. Among the first people to achieve this remarkable transformation were the Sumerians. Around 5,000 years ago, they established powerful city-states such as Uruk, Eridu, and Lagash. Each city functioned almost like its own independent kingdom, complete with its own ruler, temples, and protective deity. Competition between these cities encouraged innovation, while trade connected them with distant lands rich in timber, metals, and precious stones that Mesopotamia itself lacked. The Sumerians left behind achievements that would shape countless civilizations, including Babylon. Perhaps their greatest invention was one born not from grand philosophy, but from practical necessity. As trade expanded and governments became more complex, people needed reliable ways to record information. At first, simple symbols were pressed into soft clay to keep track of grain, livestock, and taxes. Over time, these symbols developed into a sophisticated writing system known as cuneiform. Using a reed stylus, scribes pressed wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets that were then dried beneath the sun or baked in ovens. These tablets recorded everything from business contracts and royal decrees to religious hymns, mathematical calculations, and epic stories. Writing allowed knowledge to survive beyond the lifetime of any single person, preserving ideas across generations, and laying the foundation for administration, law, literature, and education. The Sumerians also transformed the skyline of Mesopotamia with extraordinary structures known as ziggurats. Unlike the smooth-sided pyramids of Egypt, ziggurats were massive step temples built from millions of mud bricks. Rising high above the surrounding cities, they served as sacred places where people believed heaven and earth came closest together. At their summits stood temples dedicated to the city's patron god, while priests conducted rituals that were thought to ensure prosperity and divine favor for the entire community. From miles away, travelers could see these towering monuments dominating the flat plains, symbols of both religious devotion and political authority. They reminded everyone that the gods watched over the city and that its rulers governed with divine approval. Although centuries would pass before Babylon emerged as a dominant power, nearly every aspect of its greatness had roots in this earlier civilization. The systems of irrigation that fed its people, the written language that recorded its history, the traditions of kingship, the monumental temple architecture, and many of its religious beliefs all traced their origins to the remarkable achievements of the Sumerians. Babylon did not rise from an empty desert. It inherited thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, innovation, and tradition from the civilizations that came before it. The legendary city would eventually refine, expand, and immortalize this extraordinary legacy, but its foundations were laid here, in the fertile land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the true cradle of civilization, where humanity first learned not only to survive, but to build a world that would change history forever. Long before Babylon became a symbol of power, wealth, and wonder, it was little more than a modest settlement resting quietly along the eastern bank of the Euphrates River. Travelers passing through the fertile plains of Mesopotamia would have found no towering walls, magnificent palaces, and no legendary temples reaching toward the sky. Instead, they would have seen a small community of farmers, fishermen, traders, and craftsmen, whose lives revolved around the steady rhythm of the river. The Euphrates was the settlement's greatest gift. Its waters nourished nearby fields, supported growing harvests, and served as a natural highway connecting distant towns across Mesopotamia. Boats carried grain, pottery, textiles, and livestock along its gentle currents, while merchants exchanged ideas and goods from regions hundreds of miles away. Even in its earliest days, the settlement occupied a place where commerce naturally gathered. Yet for many centuries, Babylon remained overshadowed by larger and more powerful cities. Ancient centers such as Uruk, Nippur, and Isin dominated politics, religion, and trade. Their temples were older, their rulers more influential, and their populations far greater. Babylon was simply another small town among many, with little indication that it would one day become the heart of an empire. Everything began to change during a period of political uncertainty across Mesopotamia. As older kingdoms weakened through conflict and shifting alliances, new peoples moved into the regions seeking opportunity. Among them were the Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people who had gradually migrated from the western deserts into the fertile river valleys. Rather than arriving in a single great invasion, the Amorites settled over generations, integrating with local communities while bringing their own traditions, leaders, and customs. Many Amorite families became farmers and merchants, while others entered military and political life. As their influence grew, they established control over several cities throughout Mesopotamia. Babylon was one of these settlements, and under Amorite leadership, its fortunes slowly began to change. The city's rulers recognized that survival depended on more than fertile land. They strengthened local administration, improved irrigation systems, and encouraged trade with neighboring regions. Canals were expanded to carry water farther into surrounding farmland, allowing agriculture to support a steadily growing population. As harvests increased, so did prosperity. Markets became busier with each passing generation. Merchants arrived carrying copper from distant mountains, timber from northern forests, precious stones from eastern lands, and luxury goods from far beyond Mesopotamia. Babylon gradually transformed from a quiet agricultural town into a lively commercial center where cultures, languages, and traditions met along crowded streets. As wealth increased, so did ambition. The city's earliest Amorite kings worked to consolidate their authority, strengthening defenses and expanding their influence over nearby settlements. Although these rulers are less famous than the great kings who would follow, they laid the foundations for Babylon's future greatness. They organized government, collected taxes, maintained irrigation networks, and ensured that trade could flourish in relative stability. Their achievements may not have produced dramatic conquests, but they created something equally valuable, a city capable of sustained growth. Babylon's identity also became closely connected to its name, a name that would eventually become known across the ancient world. In Akkadian, the city was called Babilu, commonly understood to mean the Gate of God, or the Gate of the Gods. Whether this name reflected an ancient religious tradition, or was later embraced to emphasize the city's sacred importance, it expressed a powerful idea. Babylon was not merely another settlement. It was believed to be a place where the divine and human worlds could meet. This spiritual significance would only grow over time. Magnificent temples would eventually dominate the city's skyline, and Babylon would become one of the foremost religious centers of Mesopotamia. Pilgrims, priests, and scholars would gather there, reinforcing its reputation as both a political capital and a sacred city. Still, perhaps Babylon's greatest advantage was neither its religion nor its rulers. It was its location. Situated near the crossroads of Mesopotamia, Babylon occupied an exceptionally strategic position. The Euphrates River connected it with prosperous cities to the north, and the rich agricultural lands of the south. Caravan routes crossing the surrounding plains linked the city to Syria, Anatolia, the Persian Gulf, and regions even farther away. Goods, travelers, diplomats, and ideas all passed through Babylon, making it a natural center for commerce and communication. Whoever controlled Babylon could influence trade flowing across much of Mesopotamia. The city's fertile surroundings ensured a reliable food supply, while its central location allowed rulers to respond quickly to opportunities and threats alike. In an age when rivers served as highways and trade determined power, Babylon possessed advantages that few cities could match. What had once been an ordinary riverside settlement was steadily becoming something far more important. Its population continued to grow, its markets became increasingly prosperous, and its political influence expanded with each generation. Although no one living there could yet imagine the extraordinary future awaiting their city, the foundations had already been laid. Soon, a remarkable ruler would rise to the throne, one whose vision, ambition, and determination would transform Babylon from a growing regional city into the dominant power of Mesopotamia. Under his leadership, the name Babylon would begin its journey toward becoming one of the most legendary cities in all of human history. By the time Babylon had grown from a modest riverside town into a prosperous regional city, the political landscape of Mesopotamia remained deeply divided. Dozens of kingdoms competed for fertile farmland, valuable trade routes, and precious water supplies. Alliances shifted constantly, rival rulers fought for dominance, and no single power was strong enough to unite the region for long. It was into this world of uncertainty that one of history's most influential rulers emerged. His name was Hammurabi. Born around the early 18th century BCE, Hammurabi inherited the throne of Babylon from his father, Sin-Muballit. At the time, Babylon was respected but far from being the greatest kingdom in Mesopotamia. Powerful rivals surrounded it on every side, and many believed the young king would spend his reign simply defending his borders. Instead, Hammurabi possessed remarkable patience, political skill, and strategic vision. During the early years of his reign, he avoided unnecessary wars. Rather than rushing into battle, he strengthened Babylon from within. Irrigation canals were repaired and expanded, improving harvests across the countryside. Temples were restored, strengthening religious unity. City walls were maintained, roads improved, and trade encouraged. These investments made Babylon wealthier, more stable, and better prepared for the challenges ahead. Only when the time was right did Hammurabi begin his campaign to reshape Mesopotamia. One by one, neighboring kingdoms fell under his control. Sometimes he secured alliances through diplomacy, while at other times he relied upon military force. Cities that had once considered Babylon an insignificant rival gradually found themselves facing an increasingly powerful kingdom, with disciplined armies and capable leadership. Among his greatest victories were campaigns against the powerful kingdoms of Larsa, Eshnunna, Mari, and eventually Assyria's influence in parts of northern Mesopotamia. Each conquest expanded Babylon's territory and brought valuable farmland, trade routes, and skilled workers under Hammurabi's authority. Within only a few decades, Babylon transformed from a regional kingdom into the dominant power of southern Mesopotamia. For the first time in generations, much of the region was united under a single ruler. This achievement did more than expand borders, it created a new political order. Merchants could travel more safely across longer distances. Taxes became more organized. Irrigation systems were managed on a larger scale, benefiting agriculture throughout the kingdom. The prosperity of Babylon grew alongside its expanding influence. Yet Hammurabi understood that conquering land was only the beginning. An empire could not survive through military strength alone. Diverse cities with different customs, languages, and traditions required a common system of justice. People needed to understand not only who ruled them, but also the laws by which they would live. This realization led to one of the greatest legal achievements in human history. Around the middle of his reign, Hammurabi ordered the creation of what is now known as the Code of Hammurabi. The laws were carved into a towering stone stele beneath an image showing the king receiving authority from Shamash, the Mesopotamian god of justice. This powerful scene reminded everyone that law, was not merely a human invention but something believed to be sanctioned by the divine. The code contained nearly 300 individual laws covering almost every aspect of daily life. There were rules governing trade, property ownership, agriculture, wages, marriage, inheritance, debts, contracts, theft, violence, and professional responsibility. Builders could be punished if poorly constructed houses collapsed. Merchants were expected to conduct honest business. Judges who delivered unfair decisions could themselves face severe penalties. Farmers, laborers, doctors, and craftsmen all operated within a clearly defined legal framework. Some of these punishments appear extremely harsh by modern standards. The famous principle, often summarized as an eye for an eye, reflected the belief that punishment should correspond to the crime committed. However, the code was more than a collection of severe penalties. It also established written procedures for resolving disputes and protecting property rights. For many people, having publicly known laws offered greater consistency than relying entirely upon the personal decisions of local rulers or officials. Life under Hammurabi became increasingly organized. Markets bustled with activity as merchants traded goods from distant lands. Farmers cultivated wheat, barley, dates, and vegetables along carefully maintained irrigation canals. Skilled artisans produced pottery, jewelry, textiles, and metalwork that traveled throughout the kingdom. Scribes carefully recorded contracts and taxes on clay tablets using cuneiform writing, while priests continued their religious ceremonies in Babylon's magnificent temples. The capital itself grew richer and more impressive with each passing year. Administrative officials managed the expanding empire. Engineers maintained canals and defenses, and caravans regularly arrived carrying valuable goods from regions stretching far beyond Mesopotamia. Babylon had become not only a political capital but also a center of commerce, culture, and learning. Perhaps Hammurabi's greatest legacy, however, was not the empire he built, but the ideas he left behind. Although his kingdom eventually declined after his death, the principles embodied in his legal code continued to influence later civilizations. Future rulers across the ancient Near East adopted the concept that laws should be written, preserved, and publicly recognized rather than existing only in the memories of judges or kings. The belief that governments should establish clear legal standards became one of the enduring foundations of organized civilization. For thousands of years, scholars have studied the Code of Hammurabi, because every law was fair by modern standards, but because it represents one of humanity's earliest and most complete attempts to create a comprehensive system of justice. It reveals how ancient societies understood order, responsibility, and authority, offering an extraordinary window into everyday life nearly 4,000 years ago. Through military brilliance, administrative reform, and legal innovation, Hammurabi transformed Babylon into the greatest kingdom of its age. His reign marked the beginning of Babylon's golden age, ensuring that both his name and his city would echo across history long after the empire itself had faded. While kings and generals shaped the destiny of Babylon through conquest and diplomacy, the true heartbeat of the city could be found in the lives of its ordinary people. Every sunrise brought the sounds of thousands of citizens beginning another day inside one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. Farmers headed toward the fertile fields beyond the walls, merchants prepared their stalls, craftsmen opened their workshops, and children followed their parents through streets already alive with activity. For most residents, home was a simple mud brick house built close to neighboring families. Because stone was scarce in Mesopotamia, sun-dried mud bricks became the primary building material. Many homes were arranged around a small central courtyard that allowed fresh air to circulate during the region's scorching summers. The courtyard served as the heart of family life, where meals were shared, children played, and daily chores were completed. Wealthier citizens enjoyed larger homes with multiple rooms and decorative wooden doors, while poorer families lived in more modest dwellings, yet nearly every house reflected practical designs suited to Babylon's hot climate. Beyond the homes lay the city's busy streets. From early morning until sunset, Babylon's marketplaces buzzed with life. Merchants displayed baskets overflowing with dates, barley, onions, figs, and vegetables harvested from nearby farms. Others sold fragrant spices, colorful woven textiles, finely crafted pottery, bronze tools, jewelry, and imported luxury goods from distant kingdoms. The air carried a mixture of voices as traders bargained over prices, while donkeys loaded with goods slowly made their way through crowded streets. Babylon's markets were more than places of commerce. They were meeting places where travelers exchanged news, ideas, and stories from every corner of the ancient Near East. The city's prosperity depended heavily upon skilled craftsmen. Potters carefully shaped clay into jars, bowls, and storage vessels before firing them in blazing kilns. Metalworkers forged bronze weapons, farming tools, and decorative ornaments. Carpenters transformed imported timber into furniture, doors, and chariots, while jewelers fashioned necklaces and rings from gold, silver, and precious stones. Every profession contributed to the city's growing wealth, and many crafts were passed down from parents to children, preserving techniques developed over generations. Yet beneath Babylon's prosperity lay something even more essential. Agriculture remained the foundation of the entire economy. The fertile plains surrounding the city produced abundant harvests of barley, wheat, dates, sesame, vegetables, and fruit. Livestock such as sheep, goats, and cattle provided meat, wool, leather, and milk. Without successful farming, Babylon's magnificent temples, bustling markets, and expanding population could never have survived. Making agriculture possible required one of Babylon's greatest engineering achievements: its sophisticated irrigation system. Water from the Euphrates River flowed through an intricate network of canals, reservoirs, and smaller channels that carried life across the dry plains. Thousands of workers regularly maintained these waterways, removing mud and repairing damaged banks before seasonal floods could destroy them. The system demanded careful planning and cooperation, but in return it transformed arid land into fields capable of feeding hundreds of thousands of people. Family stood at the center of Babylonian society. Households often included several generations living together under one roof. Fathers were generally considered the heads of the family and were responsible for providing food, protecting the household, and making important decisions. Mothers managed many aspects of daily domestic life, raising children, preparing meals, weaving textiles, and overseeing household servants when the family could afford them. Women in Babylon occupied a more complex position than many people might expect. Although society remained largely patriarchal, women could own property, inherit wealth under certain circumstances, conduct business, and appear before courts. Some worked as merchants, priestesses, brewers, or textile producers, while wealthy women occasionally managed significant estates. Their rights were not equal to those of men, but compared with many other ancient societies, Babylonian women could exercise a surprising degree of economic and legal independence. Education was highly valued, though it was available primarily to children from wealthier families. Young boys who were destined to become scribes attended special schools, where they learned the difficult art of cuneiform writing. Using reed styluses, They spent years copying signs onto clay tablets until they mastered hundreds of symbols. Alongside writing, they studied mathematics, law, religion, and administration. Becoming a scribe offered one of the most respected careers in Babylon, opening opportunities to work in temples, royal courts, or government offices. Most children, however, learned through everyday experience. Boys often assisted their fathers in farming, trade, or craftsmanship, while girls learned household skills, weaving, food preparation, and family responsibilities from their mothers. Childhood included moments of play with simple toys made from clay or wood, but from an early age, children were expected to contribute to family life and prepare for adulthood. Not everyone living in Babylon enjoyed the same freedoms. Slavery formed part of the city's economy, as it did in many ancient civilizations. Some slaves had been captured during wars, while others entered slavery because of debt or poverty. They worked in households, farms, workshops, temples, and construction projects. Although their lives were often difficult, Babylonian law granted certain legal protections, and under specific circumstances, some enslaved people could eventually purchase or earn their freedom. Babylon's success also depended upon its merchants. Caravans traveled across deserts and mountains carrying copper from Anatolia, cedar wood from Lebanon, precious stones from the East, incense from Arabia, and countless other valuable goods. The city stood at the crossroads of major trade routes, making it one of the busiest commercial centers in the ancient world. Every arriving caravan enriched Babylon, while connecting it with civilizations far beyond Mesopotamia. As evening approached, the crowded streets gradually grew quieter. Shops closed their doors, families gathered inside their homes, priests offered prayers in towering temples, and lamps flickered softly beneath the shadow of Babylon's great walls. It was a city filled with extraordinary monuments, but its true greatness rested not only upon kings or armies. It lived in the hands of farmers who cultivated the land, craftsmen who shaped beauty from clay and metal, merchants who connected distant worlds, teachers who preserved knowledge, and families whose daily lives gave Babylon its enduring spirit. Together, these ordinary people transformed Babylon from a powerful capital into one of the most vibrant urban societies the ancient world had ever known. To truly understand Babylon, one must look beyond its towering walls, bustling markets, and magnificent palaces. At the heart of the city stood something even more powerful than its kings or armies, its religion. For the people of Babylon, the gods were not distant beings living beyond human reach. They were believed to guide the rivers, determine the harvest, protect the city, and shape the destiny of every individual. Every important decision, from planting crops to declaring war, was made with the belief that divine approval was essential. Among all the gods worshipped in Babylon, none was more important than Marduk. Originally, Marduk had been one deity among many in the Mesopotamian pantheon. However, as Babylon rose from a small city to the capital of a mighty empire, Marduk's status rose alongside it. By the reign of Hammurabi, and especially in later centuries, he had become the supreme god of Babylon, regarded as the protector of the city and the king of all the gods. According to Babylonian mythology, Marduk earned this position through an epic cosmic battle. In the famous creation story known as the Enuma Elish, he defeated Tiamat, the ancient goddess of chaos and the sea. After his victory, Marduk used her divided body to create the heavens and the earth, bringing order out of chaos. The story symbolized far more than mythology. Just as Marduk established order in the universe, Babylon's kings claimed they maintained order within the human world under his divine authority. Although Marduk occupied the highest place, Babylonian religion included hundreds of other deities. Shamash was the god of justice and the sun, believed to watch over laws and reveal truth. Ishtar, one of the most widely worshipped goddesses, represented love, fertility, beauty, and wore a powerful combination reflecting both creation and destruction. Ea, also known as Enki, ruled wisdom, fresh water, and knowledge, while Sin governed the moon and Nabu became the god of writing, learning and scribes. Each god possessed distinct responsibilities, and together they formed a divine family believed to oversee every aspect of nature and society. Storms, floods, disease, prosperity, victory, and even dreams were often understood as expressions of the god's will. At the spiritual center of Babylon stood the magnificent Sagilla, the great temple dedicated to Marduk. Located near the city's ceremonial heart, Sagilla was more than a place of worship. It functioned as a religious, cultural, and economic center where priests performed sacred rituals, preserved ancient traditions, and cared for the magnificent statue of Marduk. The temple complex included courtyards, shrines, storerooms, workshops, and living quarters for those served within its walls. Nearby rose the immense ziggurat known as Itemenanki, a towering stepped structure that many historians believe inspired later stories of the Tower of Babel. Reaching high above the city's skyline, it symbolized the connection between heaven and earth. To the people of Babylon, climbing its terraces represented drawing closer to the divine realm. Religion shaped the rhythm of everyday life. Each morning and evening, priests performed ceremonies that included prayers, incense, sacred hymns, and offerings of food and drink presented before the gods' statues. These rituals were believed to nourish the deities symbolically and maintain harmony between the human and divine worlds. Festivals mark the changing seasons, successful harvests, and important moments in the religious calendar, ensuring that the gods remained favorable toward the city. The greatest celebration of all was the Akitu festival, the Babylonian New Year. Held each spring, this festival lasted several days and drew enormous crowds from across the kingdom. During the celebrations, the statue of Marduk was carried in a magnificent procession through Babylon's streets, while priests recited the Enuma Elish, retelling the story of creation and Marduk's victory over chaos. The festival celebrated not only the beginning of a new year, but also the renewal of cosmic order itself. One of the most remarkable ceremonies involved the king. Before Marduk's statue, the high priest temporarily removed the king's royal symbols and required him to confess that he had ruled justly. Tradition held that the priest would even strike the king across the face. Tears appeared in the ruler's eyes. It was interpreted as a sign that Marduk accepted his leadership for another year. This extraordinary ritual reminded everyone that even the most powerful king remained subject to divine authority. The priests of Babylon occupied positions of immense influence. Far more than religious leaders, they served as scholars, astronomers, physicians, record keepers, and advisors to the royal court. They carefully observed the movements of the stars, interpreted eclipses and unusual natural events, and advised kings on matters ranging from military campaigns to temple construction. Their knowledge combined religion with careful observation, making them among the most educated people in the ancient world. Offerings and sacrifices also played an important role in Babylonian worship. Most sacrifices consisted of sheep, goats, cattle, grain, wine, oil, incense, and valuable goods presented to the temples. These offerings expressed gratitude, sought forgiveness, or requested divine protection. Contrary to many dramatic legends, historical evidence indicates that Babylonian religious practice centered overwhelmingly on animal and agricultural offerings, rather than widespread human sacrifice. Perhaps nowhere was religion more closely connected to politics than in Babylon. The king was not worshipped as a god, but he ruled as Marduk's chosen representative on earth. Every major military campaign, public building project, and legal reform was presented as fulfilling the will of the gods. Victories in war were celebrated as signs of divine favor, while disasters, famine, or military defeat could be interpreted as evidence that the gods had withdrawn their blessing. In Babylon, religion was not confined to temples or festivals. It shaped government, law, education, agriculture, and the daily lives of ordinary people. Faith united the empire, strengthened royal authority, and gave meaning to both triumph and hardship. To the Babylonians, maintaining harmony with the gods was not simply an act of devotion, it was the foundation upon which their entire civilization rested. Few stories connected to Babylon have captured the human imagination as deeply as the legend of the Tower of Babel. For thousands of years, it has been told in religious texts, painted by artists, and debated by historians and archaeologists alike. To some, it is a powerful lesson about human pride. To others, it may preserve the memory of a real monument that once dominated the skyline of ancient Babylon. The question remains as fascinating today as it was centuries ago. Was the Tower of Babel merely a legend, or did it have a historical foundation? The most famous account appears in the book of Genesis in the Bible. According to the story, after the Great Flood, humanity spoke a single language and lived together in unity. Seeking to make a name for themselves, the people decided to build a city with a tower so tall that its top would reach the heavens. The tower represented humanity's ambition to challenge the limits set by God. In response, God confused their language so that they could no longer understand one another. Unable to communicate, the builders abandoned their work and scattered across the earth, giving rise to different nations and languages. The unfinished city became known as Babel, a name associated in the biblical narrative with confusion and division. For centuries, readers wondered whether this story referred to an actual structure. Although no archaeological discovery has ever confirmed the existence of the biblical Tower of Babel exactly as described in Genesis, many historians believe the story may have been inspired by a very real building that stood in Babylon, the enormous ziggurat known as Etemenanke. Its name has been translated as the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Standing beside the great Tate Temple of Azagila, Etemenanke was one of the most impressive religious monuments in Mesopotamia. Ancient records describe it as a massive step tower built from millions of mud bricks. Rising through several terraces toward the sky, it served as both a sacred symbol and a place of worship dedicated to the god Marduk. To travelers approaching Babylon from miles away, the ziggurat must have appeared almost unbelievable. Towering above the flat plains of Mesopotamia, its summit seemed to touch the clouds. In a world where most buildings were only 1 or 2 stories high, Etemenanke would have looked like a stairway reaching toward heaven itself. This striking appearance has led many scholars to believe that memories of the great ziggurat gradually evolved into the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. Historical evidence supports the existence of Etemenanke. Ancient Babylonian inscriptions, including those from King Nebuchadnezzar II, describe extensive restoration work on the Great Tower. Greek historians who visited Babylon centuries later also wrote about an immense step temple dominating the city's skyline. Together, these written sources strongly suggest that Etemenanke was indeed one of the largest religious structures of the ancient world. Modern archaeology has added further pieces to the puzzle. Excavations carried out in Babylon during the 19th and 20th centuries uncovered the enormous square foundations believed to belong to Etemenanke. These remains reveal that the structure once stood on a vast platform capable of supporting an exceptionally large ziggurat. Clay tablets and inscriptions found at the site provide additional evidence describing its dimensions, religious importance, and repeated reconstruction after periods of damage. Yet, despite these discoveries, many mysteries remain unsolved. No complete reconstruction of the tower has survived. Archaeologists continue to debate exactly how tall it was, how many levels it contained, and what its upper temple looked like. Ancient descriptions differ in important details, and much of the original mud brick structure disappeared long ago through erosion, rebuilding, and the passage of time. The biblical account itself also remains open to interpretation. Some scholars view it as a symbolic story, explaining the diversity of human languages, while others believe it preserves distant memories of Babylon's extraordinary monuments. There is no definitive evidence proving that Itemenanki was the Tower of Babel described in Genesis, nor is there evidence completely ruling out a historical connection. Perhaps that uncertainty is what makes the story so enduring. The Tower of Babel stands at the crossroads of history, archaeology, and faith. It reminds us that ancient civilizations often leave behind both physical ruins and powerful legends, each revealing different truths about the people who created them. Whether the tower was a real building transformed by centuries of storytelling, or a timeless parable inspired by Babylon's greatness, it continues to symbolize humanity's endless desire to reach beyond the ordinary and touch the heavens. Even today, thousands of years after Babylon's fall, the mystery of the Tower of Babel remains one of the ancient world's most captivating unanswered questions. Among all the wonders associated with ancient Babylon, none has inspired more fascination than the legendary Hanging Gardens. Counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, they have captured the imagination of travelers, historians, artists, and dreamers for more than 2,000 years. Ancient writers described a breathtaking paradise rising above the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, a lush mountain of trees, flowers, and flowing water in the heart of one of the world's greatest cities. Yet despite centuries of exploration, no one has ever found undeniable evidence that the gardens truly existed. Were the Hanging Gardens a magnificent engineering masterpiece, or were they simply one of history's most beautiful legends? According to the traditional story, the gardens were built during the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled Babylon during its greatest period of prosperity in the 6th century BCE. Under his leadership, the city reached extraordinary heights. Massive defensive walls surrounded Babylon, magnificent temples honored the gods, and grand palaces reflected the wealth of a vast empire stretching across much of the ancient Near East. Nebuchadnezzar was known as one of history's greatest builders. Numerous inscriptions record his ambitious construction projects throughout Babylon. He restored temples, expanded the royal palace, strengthened the city's walls, and rebuilt ceremonial avenues that impressed visitors from across the known world. It is therefore not surprising that later generations believed such a ruler could also have created one of history's greatest architectural wonders. The most famous legend tells of love rather than conquest. Nebuchadnezzar's wife, Queen Emetis, was said to have come from the mountainous kingdom of Media, located in what is now western Iran. Having grown up surrounded by green forests, flowing streams, and cool hills, she reportedly found the flat, dry plains of Babylon painfully unfamiliar. Although Babylon was wealthy and magnificent, it lacked the towering landscapes of her homeland. Wanting to ease her homesickness, the king is said to have ordered the construction of an extraordinary series of elevated gardens unlike anything the world had ever seen. Ancient descriptions speak of enormous terraces rising one above another, supported by massive stone columns and covered with deep layers of fertile soil. Trees, vines, flowering plants, and exotic shrubs supposedly flourished upon these artificial mountains. Water was lifted continuously from the Euphrates River through an ingenious mechanical system, allowing the gardens to remain green despite the hot Mesopotamian climate. Visitors reportedly heard the gentle sound of flowing water while birds nested among towering trees. Cool shade replaced the burning desert sun, and fragrant flowers filled the air with sweet aromas. From a distance, the gardens appeared to float above the city walls, giving rise to the name Hanging Gardens, not because the plants literally hung in the air, but because the terraces projected outward, creating the illusion of greenery suspended above the ground. It is certainly a captivating image. However, modern historians face a surprising problem. No surviving Babylonian inscription written during Nebuchadnezzar's reign clearly mentions the Hanging Gardens. This absence is remarkable, because Nebuchadnezzar proudly documented many of his building projects in extraordinary detail. He recorded the construction of temples, palaces, gates, walls, and canals, yet none of the surviving royal inscriptions describe the gardens that later became famous throughout the ancient world. Instead, most detailed descriptions come from Greek and Roman writers who lived centuries after Babylon's golden age. Although these authors likely relied upon earlier sources, none personally witnessed the gardens themselves. Their accounts differ in important details, raising questions about how much was based on historical fact, and how much had become legend over time. As a result, several modern theories have emerged. One possibility is that the Hanging Gardens truly existed in Babylon, but were completely destroyed by wars, earthquakes, and the gradual erosion of mud brick structures over more than 2,000 years. Since much of ancient Babylon was built from materials that decay easily, it is possible that little physical evidence survived. Another fascinating theory suggests that the gardens were never in Babylon at all. Some scholars argue that ancient writers confused Babylon with the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, where King Sennacherib described magnificent royal gardens supplied by advanced irrigation systems. Archaeological discoveries in Nineveh have revealed sophisticated canals, aqueducts, and inscriptions celebrating lush palace gardens that closely resemble later descriptions of the Hanging Gardens. If this theory is correct, one of history's greatest wonders may have stood hundreds of kilometers away from the city that eventually claimed its fame. Despite more than a century of archaeological excavations, no universally accepted remains of the Hanging Gardens have ever been discovered. Several structures uncovered in Babylon have been proposed as possible foundations, reservoirs, or irrigation systems connected to the gardens, but none has convinced the majority of scholars. The evidence remains incomplete, and every new theory raises additional questions. Perhaps that is why the Hanging Gardens continue to enchant us. They exist somewhere between history and imagination, where archaeology meets mythology. Whether they were an astonishing feat of engineering built for a beloved queen, a misunderstanding preserved through ancient storytelling, or a wonder that once stood in another great city entirely, they remind us that not every chapter of the ancient world can be explained with certainty. Some of history's greatest treasures leave behind magnificent ruins. Others leave only stories, and sometimes those stories prove just as enduring as stone. If Hammurabi transformed Babylon into a great empire through law and conquest, then Nebuchadnezzar II transformed it into one of the most magnificent cities the ancient world had ever seen. His reign, which lasted from 605 to 562 BCE, marked the height of Babylonian power, wealth, and architectural achievement. Even centuries after his death, ancient writers continued to speak of Babylon as a city unlike any other, and much of that reputation was the result of Nebuchadnezzar's extraordinary vision. When Nebuchadnezzar inherited the throne from his father, Nabopolassar, the Neo-Babylonian Empire was already a rising force in the Near East. Together, father and son had helped overthrow the once mighty Assyrian Empire, creating an opportunity for Babylon to become the dominant power in the region. Nebuchadnezzar quickly proved himself to be both a brilliant military commander and an ambitious ruler determined to leave a lasting legacy. Unlike many kings who measured greatness only through conquest, Nebuchadnezzar believed that a capital city should reflect the power of its empire. He launched one of the largest building programs in ancient history, rebuilding Babylon on a scale that astonished everyone who visited. Massive defensive walls surrounded the city, stretching for miles across the plains. Ancient writers claim that chariots could race side by side along the broad tops of these walls. Although some of these descriptions were likely exaggerated, archaeology confirms that Babylon possessed one of the most impressive fortification systems of the ancient world. Inside the city, Nebuchadnezzar rebuilt temples dedicated to Babylon's gods, restored the great temple of Isagila, and continued work on the towering ziggurat of Itamananki. Wide ceremonial streets were paved and lined with magnificent buildings, creating grand processional routes for religious festivals. The most famous entrance to the city became the dazzling Ishtar Gate, covered with brilliant blue glazed bricks and decorated with hundreds of reliefs depicting lions, bulls, and dragons. To visitors arriving from distant lands, the gate announced that they were entering the capital of one of the world's greatest civilizations, while transforming Babylon into an architectural masterpiece. Nebuchadnezzar also expanded his empire through military campaigns. His armies marched across Syria, Phoenicia, and the eastern Mediterranean, bringing strategic trade routes and wealthy cities under Babylonian control. These victories strengthened the empire's economy and secured its influence throughout the Near East. Tribute flowed into Babylon from conquered territories, enriching the royal treasury and helping finance even more ambitious construction projects. One of Nebuchadnezzar's most significant campaigns was against the Kingdom of Judah. After repeated rebellions against Babylonian rule, Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem. In 586 BCE, the city fell. The first temple, central to Jewish religious life, was destroyed, and many of Judah's political leaders, craftsmen, priests, and educated citizens were taken to Babylon. This event became known as the Babylonian exile or the Babylonian captivity, one of the most influential moments in Jewish history. Although the exile represented a profound tragedy for those who experienced it, it also shaped the development of Jewish religious identity and literature for generations. Babylon, therefore, became deeply woven into the historical and spiritual traditions of the Bible, where it often symbolized both immense power and human pride. Despite his reputation as a conqueror, Nebuchadnezzar devoted much of his reign to strengthening rather than simply expanding his kingdom. Trade flourished under his rule, agriculture remained productive through carefully maintained irrigation systems, and Babylon became a center of learning, religion, and commerce. Merchants from distant lands filled its markets, while scholars, priests, and scribes preserved centuries of Mesopotamian knowledge. By the middle of his reign, Babylon had reached the peak of its greatness. Its magnificent temples dominated the skyline, Its towering walls inspired awe among travelers. Its markets overflowed with goods from across the ancient world, and its influence extended far beyond Mesopotamia. Whether visitors came as merchants, diplomats, pilgrims, or even captives, they encountered a city that seemed almost beyond imagination. It was during this remarkable period that Babylon earned its enduring reputation as the greatest city of its age. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, the empire achieved a level of prosperity, architectural splendor, and political influence that few ancient civilizations could rival. Although its golden age would not last forever, the legacy of this extraordinary king ensured that the name of Babylon would continue to echo through history long after its walls had fallen into ruin. Imagine approaching Babylon at the height of its glory during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II. After days or even weeks of traveling across the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, the horizon slowly begins to change. What first appears a distant line gradually grows into an immense city unlike anything most travelers have ever seen. Towering walls rise from the flat landscape, their sunlit surfaces glowing beneath the brilliant sky. Above them, temple towers and palace roofs reach toward the heavens, announcing that this is not merely another city, it is the capital of an empire. The first feature to capture every visitor's attention is Babylon's extraordinary defensive walls. Ancient writers described them with amazement, claiming they were among the strongest fortifications ever constructed. Although some classical accounts likely exaggerated their size, archaeological evidence confirms that Babylon possessed an impressive system of multiple defensive walls built from millions of mud bricks reinforced with baked bricks. These massive barriers surrounded the city's most important districts, protecting its people, palaces, temples, and treasures. The walls were strengthened by numerous watchtowers where soldiers kept constant watch over the surrounding plains. Guards monitored every approach to the city, ensuring that merchants entered safely while enemies twice before attempting an attack. For the citizens living inside, the walls represented more than military protection, they symbolized the strength and permanence of Babylon itself. Beyond the outer defenses lay another formidable obstacle. A broad moat, fed by the waters of the Euphrates River, surrounded sections of the city. This defensive ditch made direct assaults far more difficult, forcing invading armies to overcome both water and towering walls before reaching the gates. Engineers carefully managed the flow of water through canals and floodgates, demonstrating the Babylonians' remarkable understanding of hydraulic engineering. Passing through the city's defenses, travelers entered one of the most magnificent ceremonial avenues of the ancient world, the famous processional way. This broad, carefully paved road stretched through the heart of Babylon, connecting important religious and political monuments. During ordinary days, merchants, government officials, and citizens filled the avenue with constant activity. But during major religious festivals, especially the New Year celebration known as Akitu, the processional way became the stage for grand ceremonies. Statues of the gods were carried along this route in magnificent processions, accompanied by priests, musicians, soldiers, and thousands of spectators. The avenue itself was decorated with brightly colored glazed bricks and reliefs depicting lions, sacred animals associated with the goddess Ishtar. Walking this road was meant to inspire both devotion and awe. At the northern entrance to the ceremonial avenue stood one of Babylon's most breathtaking monuments, the legendary Ishtar Gate. Covered in brilliant blue glazed bricks that shimmered beneath the sunlight, the gate must have appeared almost magical to ancient visitors. Rows of carefully crafted reliefs showed powerful bulls representing the storm god Adad and fierce dragons symbolizing Marduk. These sacred creatures seemed to guard the entrance, reminding everyone that they were passing into a city protected by both divine and royal authority. Today, portions of the reconstructed Ishtar Gate can still be admired in museums, allowing modern visitors to glimpse the extraordinary craftsmanship that once welcomed travelers to Babylon. Beyond the gate rose the magnificent royal palaces. Nebuchadnezzar's palace complex covered an enormous area filled with reception halls, administrative offices, private living quarters, gardens, storerooms, and courtyards. Richly decorated walls displayed colorful glazed bricks and elaborate carvings celebrating the king's victories and the prosperity of his empire. Diplomats from distant kingdoms were received here, tribute was presented before the throne, and important decisions affecting millions of people were made within these grand halls. Nearby stood Babylon's Sacred Heart. The Temple of Asagila, dedicated to Marduk, attracted priests and worshippers from across Mesopotamia. Beside it towered the immense ziggurat Itemenanki, whose stepped terraces dominated the city's skyline. From almost anywhere inside Babylon, citizens could look upward and see these sacred structures rising above the rooftops, constantly reminding them of the close relationship between religion and daily life. Surrounding these magnificent monuments were the neighborhoods where ordinary Babylonians lived, narrow streets wound between rows of mud brick houses, built around quiet interior courtyards. Bakers filled the air with the scent of fresh bread, potters shaped clay vessels in busy workshops, and blacksmiths hammered bronze tools while children played outside their family homes. Merchants called out to passing customers, donkeys carried heavy loads through crowded lanes, and scribes carefully recorded business transactions on clay tablets. The city never stood still. Boats moved continuously along the Euphrates River, transporting grain, timber, stone, and luxury goods between different districts. Markets overflowed with merchants speaking many languages, reflecting Babylon's role as one of the greatest commercial centers of the ancient world. Every street, canal, and marketplace revealed the extraordinary energy of a civilization at its peak. Seen from above, Babylon was truly a masterpiece of ancient urban planning. Its massive walls enclosed an orderly landscape of temples, palaces, gardens, canals, homes, workshops, and marketplaces connected by carefully planned roads. The Euphrates River flowed through the city like a lifeline, sustaining both its people and its prosperity. Rising above everything else were the gleaming temples and towering ziggurat, symbols of a civilization that believed its capital stood at the very center of the world. To those fortunate enough to witness Babylon in its golden age, it must have seemed not simply like the greatest city on earth, but a place where human ambition had reached its highest expression, a city built to inspire wonder, command respect, and leave an unforgettable mark upon history. Although Babylon is often remembered for its mighty kings, magnificent temples, and legendary monuments, one of its greatest legacies cannot be seen in stone. It survives instead in the way we measure time, calculate angles, observe the heavens, and understand the rhythm of the universe. Long before telescopes, computers, or modern observatories existed, Babylonian scholars were carefully studying mathematics and the night sky with remarkable precision. Their discoveries would influence civilizations for thousands of years. The Babylonians inherited much of their scientific knowledge from the earlier Sumerians, but they refined and expanded it into one of the most advanced intellectual traditions of the ancient world. Within temple schools, scribes spent years mastering mathematics, writing, and astronomy. Using clay tablets and cuneiform script, they recorded calculations, observations, and predictions that continue to astonish historians today. Perhaps their most influential achievement was their unique numbering system. Unlike the decimal system based on 10 that most of the world uses today, the Babylonians developed a sexagesimal, or base 60 system. At first glance, 60 may seem like an unusual choice. Yet it proved remarkably practical because it can be divided evenly by many different numbers, including 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This flexibility made complex calculations much easier for merchants, engineers, surveyors, and astronomers. Although nearly 4,000 years have passed, the Babylonian system still shapes our daily lives. Every hour contains 60 minutes, and every minute contains 60 seconds. When we look at a clock, we are unknowingly following a tradition first developed in ancient Mesopotamia. Even the way we measure circles reflects Babylonian mathematics. A complete circle is divided into 360 degrees, a number closely connected to their base 60 system and their careful observations of the heavens. These ideas became so practical that later civilizations adopted them, and they remain in use across the world today. Mathematics in Babylon was never pursued simply for curiosity. It served practical purposes throughout society. Engineers used calculations when constructing canals, temples, and city walls. Farmers measured fields and managed irrigation systems. Merchants kept detailed accounts of trade, loans, and taxes. Builders estimated the materials required for ambitious construction projects, while government officials relied upon mathematical records to administer one of the largest empires of the ancient world. Yet mathematics eventually led the Babylonians toward an even greater passion. They became extraordinary observers of the sky. Night after night, generations of priests and scholars climbed to the tops of temple towers and ziggurats, where the dark Mesopotamian skies offered clear views of the stars. Without telescopes, they relied only on careful observation, remarkable patience, and meticulous record-keeping. They tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and visible planets with astonishing dedication. Every unusual event was carefully written onto clay tablets. The appearance of bright comets, the changing phases of the moon, the paths of Venus, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, and Saturn, and the positions of important constellations were all recorded over centuries. Because these observations continued across many generations, Babylonian astronomers accumulated one of the oldest continuous scientific records in human history. Among their most impressive achievements was the study of eclipses. By comparing centuries of observations, Babylonian scholars recognized repeating patterns in lunar and solar eclipses. Although they did not fully understand the astronomical causes as modern science does, they became remarkably successful at predicting when many eclipses were likely to occur. For ancient societies, where eclipses often inspired fear and religious awe, this ability represented an extraordinary intellectual accomplishment. The Babylonians also developed sophisticated calendars. Their calendar combined the cycles of the moon with the changing seasons of the sun. Months generally began with the appearance of a new crescent moon, while additional months were occasionally inserted to keep the calendar aligned with agricultural seasons. This careful system ensured that religious festivals, farming activities, and government administration remained synchronized with the natural world. The men responsible for these observations occupied unique positions within Babylonian society. They were priests, scribes, mathematicians, and astronomers all at once. In Babylon, science and religion were deeply connected. Observing the heavens was not simply an academic exercise, it was believed to reveal the intentions of the gods. Kings often consulted these learned scholars before launching military campaigns, beginning major construction projects, or making important political decisions. To modern eyes, some of their interpretations may seem superstitious. They believed unusual celestial events could foretell victory, disaster, famine, or the death of a ruler. Yet behind these beliefs lay something profoundly scientific. Centuries of disciplined observation, accurate record-keeping, and the search for repeating natural patterns. In many ways, Babylon marked one of humanity's earliest steps toward understanding the universe through careful evidence rather than memory alone. The city's temples may have fallen into ruin, and its kings may have vanished into history, but the intellectual achievements of Babylon never truly disappeared. Every glance at a clock, every measurement of a circle, and every astronomical calculation carries a quiet reminder of those ancient scholars who spent countless nights beneath the stars, searching for order in the heavens and leaving behind a legacy that still shapes the modern world. At the height of its power, Babylon was more than the political capital of a great empire. It was one of the busiest commercial centers of the ancient world, a place where roads, rivers, languages, and cultures met. Every day merchants from distant lands entered its gates carrying goods that had traveled hundreds, and sometimes even thousands of kilometers. Long before the existence of modern highways or shipping containers, Babylon stood at the crossroads of international trade, connecting civilizations across the Near East and beyond. Its location was one of its greatest advantages. Situated along the Euphrates River and near major overland trade routes, Babylon occupied a strategic position between the Mediterranean world, the Persian Gulf, Anatolia, and the Iranian plateau. Riverboats transported cargo through Mesopotamia, while caravans crossed deserts and mountains, bringing products from lands that many Babylonians would never personally visit. Goods flowed into the city from every direction, and Babylon's markets reflected the remarkable diversity of the ancient world. Walking through one of the city's great marketplaces must have been an unforgettable experience. Merchants called out in different languages while scribes recorded transactions on clay tablets. The scent of freshly baked bread mixed with exotic perfumes and aromatic spices. Pack animals carried heavy bundles through crowded streets, while skilled craftsmen examined rare materials that would soon be transformed into luxury goods for nobles, temples, and foreign rulers. To the southwest lay the ancient civilization of Egypt, one of Babylon's most important trading partners at different periods of history. From the fertile Nile Valley came fine linen, carefully woven by Egyptian artisans and prized for its softness and quality. Gold mined in Nubia often reached Near Eastern markets through Egyptian trade networks, along with ivory, papyrus, decorative objects, and precious stones. These valuable materials enriched Babylonian workshops, where local craftsmen incorporated them into jewelry, ceremonial objects, and luxury furnishings. To the east stretched the vast lands that would later become associated with Persia. Even before the Persian Empire rose to dominance, traders moved through the Iranian plateau carrying horses, gemstones, metals, and agricultural products. Mountain communities supplied durable timber, valuable minerals, and finely crafted metal goods. These eastern routes also connected Babylon to regions farther beyond, expanding its commercial influence across Asia. Farther still, merchants established indirect connections with the Indian subcontinent. Although direct travel between Babylon and India was limited compared with later centuries, trade networks linked Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley and neighboring regions through a series of intermediaries. Precious stones such as carnelian, ivory carvings, rare woods, cotton textiles, and aromatic products gradually found their way westward in Babylonian markets. Each item represented an astonishing journey across rivers, mountains, and deserts before finally reaching the city's bustling bazaars. To the northwest lay Anatolia, a region rich in natural resources that Babylon itself lacked. Copper, silver, and other valuable metals traveled south from Anatolian mines, providing essential materials for tools, weapons, jewelry, and construction. Skilled metalworkers in Babylon transformed these imported resources into products that were traded once again across the ancient world. Timber from northern forests also arrived through these routes, supplying builders with materials that were scarce on the Mesopotamian plains. Babylon's prosperity depended not only on finished goods but also on raw materials that supported its growing economy. Among the most treasured commodities were luxurious textiles. Although the famous Silk Road would not fully develop until centuries later, fine silks and silk-like fabrics from eastern regions occasionally reached the Near East through long chains of merchants. Such rare materials were extraordinarily expensive, reserved primarily for royalty and the wealthiest members of society. Owning garments woven from these exotic fabrics became a visible symbol of status and prestige. Spices were equally prized. Frankincense and myrrh from southern Arabia filled temples with fragrant smoke during religious ceremonies. Cinnamon and other aromatic products, obtained through complex trade networks extending towards South Asia, added both flavor and luxury to elite households. These precious substances were often worth their weight in silver, making them among the most valuable items transported across the ancient world. Metals formed another foundation of Babylonian commerce. Copper, tin, silver, gold, and iron all arrived from different regions, allowing Babylonian craftsmen to produce everything from farming tools and household utensils to magnificent ceremonial weapons and royal ornaments. Since Mesopotamia possessed relatively limited mineral resources, successful trade was essential to maintaining the empire's prosperity. The true heroes of this commercial world were the caravan merchants. Traveling across vast deserts and rugged mountain passes required extraordinary courage and endurance. Long lines of donkeys. In later periods, camels carried valuable cargo through dangerous landscapes, where water could be scarce and bandits posed a constant threat. Caravan leaders carefully planned each journey, calculating distances between wells, negotiating safe passage through foreign territories, and organizing guards to protect both merchants and merchandise. These expeditions often lasted for weeks or even months. When caravans finally reached Babylon, they brought more than valuable goods. They carried news of distant kingdoms, unfamiliar languages, religious ideas, artistic styles, and technological innovations. Every arriving caravan expanded Babylon's knowledge of the wider world, making the city not only a commercial center, but also a crossroads of cultures and civilizations. Babylonian merchants themselves traveled widely as well. They established trading partnerships, signed contracts recorded on clay tablets, and developed sophisticated systems of credit and finance. Written agreements protected buyers and sellers alike, while standardized weights and measures helped ensure fair transactions. These practices created a level of commercial organization remarkable for the ancient world, and contributed to Babylon's reputation as a reliable place to conduct business. By connecting Egypt, Anatolia, Persia, Arabia, and lands reaching toward India, Babylon became far more than imperial capital. It served as a bridge between civilizations, where goods, ideas, and cultures constantly flowed together. Every bustling marketplace, every heavily loaded caravan, and every merchant crossing its gates helped transform Babylon into one of the richest and most influential cities of its age. Its wealth was not built by conquest alone. It was built by trade, the endless movement of people, products, and knowledge across the ancient world, all converging within the remarkable city that stood proudly on the banks of the Euphrates River. For all its wealth, magnificent architecture, and cultural achievements, Babylon was never guaranteed peace. Its fertile lands, strategic location, and immense riches made it one of the most desirable cities in the ancient world. Kings dreamed of ruling it, rival empires sought to conquer it, and ambitious generals viewed its walls as the ultimate prize. Throughout its long history, Babylon endured repeated invasions, rebellions, civil wars, and destruction. Yet time and again, the city refused to disappear. Among Babylon's greatest rivals were the Assyrians, whose powerful empire rose to dominance in northern Mesopotamia. The Assyrians built one of the most formidable military machines of the ancient world. Their armies were disciplined, highly organized, and equipped with advanced siege technology. They conquered kingdom after kingdom, expanding their empire across much of the Near East. Babylon, despite its importance, often found itself caught between cooperation and resistance. Relations between the two powers were complicated. At times Babylon accepted Assyrian influence, while at other moments it fought fiercely for independence. Babylonian rulers frequently rebelled against Assyrian control, hoping to restore their own authority. Each uprising brought new cycles of conflict, and the struggle between the two civilizations lasted for generations. One of the darkest moments came during the reign of the Assyrian king Sennacherib. After repeated Babylonian revolts, Sennacherib decided to make an example of the city. In 689 BCE, his armies captured Babylon after a prolonged campaign. Ancient records describe how large sections of the city were destroyed, its temples damaged, and many of its inhabitants either killed or displaced. According to Assyrian inscriptions, parts of Babylon were deliberately dismantled, and debris was thrown into nearby waterways in an attempt to erase the city's greatness forever. For many civilizations, such devastation would have marked the end. For Babylon, it became another chapter in its remarkable story of survival. Even the Assyrians eventually recognized Babylon's extraordinary religious and political importance. Sennacherib's successors, particularly Esarhaddon, reversed many of his policies. Rather than leaving Babylon in ruins, they ordered the city to be rebuilt. Temples were restored, canals repaired, and displaced citizens encouraged to return. The reconstruction reflected an important reality. Babylon was simply too significant to remain abandoned. Another persistent challenge came from the Kingdom of Elam, located to the east in what is now southwestern Iran. For centuries, the Elamites competed with Mesopotamian kingdoms for influence and territory. Sometimes they invaded Babylonian lands directly, while at other times they supported local rulers seeking to overthrow Babylonian governments. Their involvement added another layer of instability to an already complex political landscape, forcing Babylon to defend itself on multiple fronts. Not all of Babylon's enemies came from beyond its walls. Internal conflicts proved equally dangerous. The city's immense wealth and political importance often sparked struggles for the throne. Rival claimants fought for royal authority. Noble families competed for influence, and provincial governors occasionally challenged the central government. These periods of civil war weakened Babylon from within, making it more vulnerable to foreign invasion. Rebellions became a recurring feature of Babylonian history. Conquered peoples sometimes resisted imperial rule, while Babylon itself repeatedly rose against foreign powers that attempted to dominate the city. Whether resisting Assyria or later competing under changing empires, the people of Babylon demonstrated a strong determination to preserve their identity and traditions. The consequences of these conflicts were often devastating. City walls were breached, homes burned, temples damaged, and valuable irrigation systems neglected or destroyed. Trade slowed as insecurity spread across the region, and ordinary families suffered through shortages, displacement, and uncertainty. Every war reminded the people that even the greatest city could be brought to the edge of ruin. Yet Babylon possessed an extraordinary ability to recover. Its location along the Euphrates remained one of the richest agricultural regions in Mesopotamia. The fertile land continued to produce abundant harvests, attracting settlers and merchants even after periods of destruction. The city's position at the crossroads of major trade routes ensured that commerce returned whenever stability was restored. Kings who conquered Babylon quickly realized that rebuilding it offered far greater rewards than leaving it abandoned. Religion also played an important role in the city's survival. Babylon was home to the great temple of Ishtar and the cult of Marduk, making it one of the most sacred cities in Mesopotamia. Rulers who wished to claim legitimacy often sought the blessing of Babylon's priests and participated in its ancient religious ceremonies. Restoring the temples became both a political necessity and a symbolic declaration that order had returned after chaos. Perhaps even more important was the resilience of Babylon's people. Farmers replanted fields after armies had marched through them. Craftsmen reopened workshops despite damaged streets. Merchants resumed trade as soon as roads became safe again. Scribes continued copying records, preserving laws, literature, and knowledge through every generation. While kings came and went, it was the determination of ordinary citizens that kept Babylon alive. Throughout its long history, Babylon was conquered more than once, rebuilt more than once, and challenged by enemies from every direction. Each destruction seemed final, yet each recovery demonstrated the remarkable strength of a civilization deeply rooted in its land, its traditions, and its people. Babylon's greatest triumph was not that it avoided disaster. It was that, again and again, it found the strength to rise from the ruins, proving that the endurance of a civilization is measured not only by the greatness of its victories, but by its ability to survive its darkest hours. For centuries, Babylon had stood as the heart of one of the world's greatest empires. Its towering walls seemed invincible, its temples reflected the glory of its gods, and its wealth attracted merchants from every corner of the ancient Near East. Yet history has often shown that no empire, no matter how powerful, lasts forever. By the middle of the 6th century BCE, a new force was rising to the east, one that would reshape the ancient world and bring Babylon's independence to an end. That force was led by Cyrus the Great, founder of the mighty Persian Empire. Unlike many conquerors before him, Cyrus was more than a brilliant military commander. He was also an exceptional strategist and statesman. In only a few decades, he united the Persian tribes, defeated the powerful Medes, conquered the wealthy kingdom of Lydia in Anatolia, and expanded his empire across vast territories. With every victory, his reputation grew. Many saw him not simply as a conqueror, but as a ruler capable of bringing stability to lands exhausted by generations of conflict. Eventually, only one great kingdom stood between Cyrus and complete dominance of the Near East. That kingdom was Babylon. At the time, Babylon was ruled by King Nabonidus, whose reign had become increasingly unpopular. Unlike earlier kings who devoted themselves to Marduk, Babylon's chief god, Nabonidus spent long periods away from the capital and showed unusual religious preferences. that disturbed many of Babylon's powerful priests. Political divisions deepened, and confidence in the royal court gradually weakened. Cyrus recognized these internal tensions. Rather than relying solely on military strength, he carefully presented himself as a liberator rather than a destroyer. Persian propaganda claimed that Marduk himself had chosen Cyrus to restore justice and proper worship in Babylon. Whether or not the Babylonians truly believed this message, it proved remarkably effective in undermining resistance before the Persian army even arrived. In 539 BCE, Cyrus marched toward Babylon. Ancient historians, including the Greek writer Herodotus, later described dramatic stories in which Persian engineers diverted the Euphrates River, allowing soldiers to enter the city through the river during the night. While some elements of these accounts remain debated, Babylonian records present a strikingly different picture. The Cyrus Cylinder, one of the most important surviving inscriptions from the period, suggests that Babylon surrendered with remarkably little fighting. According to Babylonian sources, Persian forces entered the city peacefully after the nearby Battle of Opis had already broken Babylonian resistance. Many citizens appear to have accepted the new ruler without significant opposition. For a city that had endured countless bloody sieges throughout its history, Babylon's final conquest as an independent empire was surprisingly peaceful. There were no widespread reports of massive destruction, burning temples, or slaughtered populations. Instead, Cyrus sought to preserve the city's religious traditions, and administrative institutions. Rather than tearing Babylon apart, he understood its immense value. With Babylon's surrender, the Neo-Babylonian Empire came to an end. The empire that had reached its greatest glory under Nebuchadnezzar II disappeared as an independent political power. Yet Babylon itself did not vanish. Instead, it became one of the most important cities within the rapidly expanding Persian Empire. Cyrus adopted a remarkably different approach from many earlier conquerors. He respected local customs and allowed conquered peoples to continue practicing their religions. Temples throughout Babylon received royal support, and priests were permitted to resume their traditional ceremonies. This policy helped secure the loyalty of local populations while strengthening Persian authority across an empire containing many different cultures and beliefs. One of Cyrus's most famous decisions concerned the Jewish people. Decades earlier, many inhabitants of the Kingdom of Judah had been taken into exile in Babylon after Nebuchadnezzar's conquest of Jerusalem. Cyrus issued a decree allowing many of these exiles to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. This act earned him lasting respect within Jewish history and contributed to his reputation as a ruler of unusual tolerance. For the ordinary citizens of Babylon, daily life changed more gradually than one might expect. Markets remained busy, farmers continued cultivating the fertile lands surrounding the Euphrates, and merchants still traveled along the great trade routes that connected Mesopotamia with distant regions. Scribes continued recording contracts on clay tablets, priests maintained ancient rituals, and craftsmen carried on the traditions that had defined Babylonian society for centuries. However, political authority had shifted. The city's kings no longer ruled an independent empire. Instead, Persian governors administered the region on behalf of the great king. Taxes now flowed toward the Persian capital, and Babylon became one province within an empire stretching from Central Asia to the Mediterranean Sea. While the city remained wealthy and influential, it was no longer the center of the ancient world. Even so, Babylon retained enormous prestige. Persian rulers frequently visited the city and recognized its symbolic importance. Its temples remained active, Its scholars continued their astronomical observations, and its reputation as a center of learning endured. For generations after the conquest, Babylon continued to thrive under Persian rule, even if its political independence had been lost forever. The conquest by Cyrus marked not the destruction of Babylon, but the beginning of a new chapter. Its empire had fallen, yet its culture, traditions, and knowledge survived within one of history's greatest multinational empires. The city that had once ruled others now adapted to being ruled itself, a reminder that while political power may pass from one civilization to another, the influence of a great city can continue long after its empire has faded. By the time Alexander the Great arrived at the gates of Babylon, the once mighty city had already spent nearly 2 centuries under Persian rule. Although it was no longer the capital of an independent empire, Babylon remained one of the richest and most respected cities in the ancient world. Its immense walls still dominated the Mesopotamian plain, its temples continued to attract priests and pilgrims, and its strategic position made it a vital center of trade and administration. Even in decline, Babylon possessed an ancient prestige that few cities could rival. Alexander understood this better than anyone. After defeating the Persian king Darius II at the decisive Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Alexander marched south toward Babylon. News of his victory spread rapidly across the empire, and many feared that another devastating siege was about to unfold. Babylon had witnessed centuries of war, rebellion, conquest, and its people knew all too well the destruction that invading armies could bring. But this time history took a different path. Rather than resisting, the city's leaders chose to surrender peacefully. The Persian governor opened Babylon's gates, and Alexander entered the city not as a destroyer but as a welcomed conqueror. Ancient sources describe crowds gathering to greet him, while priests presented offerings and recognized him as the new legitimate ruler of Babylon. For Alexander, this was more than a symbolic victory. He admired the achievements of earlier civilizations and believed that great empires should preserve, rather than erase, the cultures they conquered. Instead of looting Babylon or destroying its sacred monuments, he ordered repairs to important temples, including the great temple of Ishtar dedicated to Marduk. This decision earned him respect among many of the city's religious leaders and demonstrated his desire to rule through cooperation rather than fear. The young Macedonian king soon became fascinated by Babylon. Its broad avenues, magnificent palaces, advanced irrigation systems, and impressive temples represented centuries of accumulated knowledge and wealth. Unlike many Greek cities, Babylon already possessed sophisticated administrative institutions, experienced scribes, and an ideal location connecting the eastern and western parts of his rapidly expanding empire. As Alexander's ambitions grew, so did his vision for Babylon. Many historians believe that he intended to transform the city into one of the principal capitals, perhaps even the central capital of his vast empire. From Babylon, he could oversee territories stretching from Greece and Egypt in the west to Persia and Central Asia in the east. The city's position made it a natural crossroads where commerce, culture, and government could flourish together. Alexander ordered extensive preparations for the future. Harbors along the Euphrates were expanded to support larger fleets. Construction and restoration projects were planned throughout the city. Engineers discussed improving canals and transportation routes, while officials organized ambitious expeditions that would extend Macedonian influence into Arabia and possibly even farther. Babylon seemed destined to experience a remarkable renaissance under its new ruler. For a brief moment, It appeared that the ancient city might once again become the heart of the world's greatest empire. Yet history would take an unexpected turn. In the spring of 323 BCE, after returning from military campaigns and spending several months in Babylon, Alexander suddenly became ill. Ancient accounts describe him developing a high fever after attending a banquet. Over the following days his condition steadily worsened. Despite the efforts of his physicians, the conqueror who had defeated countless armies gradually lost the ability to speak and command. After nearly 2 weeks of illness, Alexander died at only 32 years of age. His death remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Ancient writers proposed many explanations. Some believed he succumbed to malaria or typhoid fever, diseases common in the region. Others suggested complications from old battle wounds accumulated during years of relentless campaigning. More dramatic traditions claimed he had been poisoned by political rivals eager to seize power after his death. Modern historians continue to debate the cause. Although poisoning has captured the public imagination for centuries, most scholars consider natural illness more likely. Without modern medical evidence, however, the true cause of Alexander's death can never be known with certainty. The mystery remains one of the enduring puzzles of ancient history. His death changed the fate of Babylon forever. Alexander had left no clear adult heir capable of governing his enormous empire. Almost immediately, his generals, later known as the Diadochi, or successors, began fighting among themselves for control. Instead of serving as the capital of a unified empire, Babylon became a prize contested in a series of bitter civil wars. The ambitious building projects Alexander had envisioned were largely abandoned. Although some construction continued for a time, the dream of making Babylon the permanent political center of the Hellenistic world faded rapidly. As power shifted toward newly founded cities such as Alexandria in Egypt and Seleucia on the Tigris, Babylon gradually lost both its political importance and much of its population. The city that had survived Assyrian invasions, Persian conquest, and countless centuries of upheaval had come remarkably close to experiencing a second golden age. Instead, fate intervened. Alexander's untimely death closed what may have been Babylon's final opportunity to reclaim its position at the center of the ancient world. From that moment onward, the legendary city would slowly begin its long journey from imperial capital to historical memory, leaving behind only its ruins and the enduring stories of its extraordinary past. Babylon had survived conquest, rebellion, and the rise and fall of mighty empires. It had been rebuilt after destruction, restored by ambitious kings, and admired by travelers from across the ancient world. Time and again, the city had proven that it possessed an extraordinary ability to endure. Yet in the centuries following the death of Alexander the Great, Babylon faced an enemy unlike any it had encountered before. It was not an invading army or a foreign empire. It was the slow, relentless passage of time. After years of conflict among Alexander's successors, control of Mesopotamia eventually passed to the Seleucid Empire, founded by one of his former generals, Seleucus I Nicator. Although the Seleucid rulers inherited Babylon and recognized its historical importance, their priorities lay elsewhere. Rather than restoring Babylon to its former status, they began investing in a new city that better suited their political ambitions. That city was Seleucia on the Tigris. Built only a short distance away along the Tigris River, Seleucia was carefully planned to serve as the administrative heart of the Seleucid Empire. Government officials, merchants, soldiers, and craftsmen were encouraged to settle there. The new capital offered fresh opportunities, modern infrastructure, and direct support from the ruling dynasty. Gradually, many of the people who might once have lived and worked in Babylon began moving to the rising city instead. The change did not happen overnight. For many years, Babylon remained inhabited. Priests continued performing rituals within its temples, farmers cultivated the fertile lands surrounding the Euphrates, and merchants still visited its markets. Yet the city's population slowly declined. Streets that had once echoed with the voices of thousands became quieter with each passing generation. Economic changes accelerated the process. Trade routes that had once made Babylon one of the richest cities in the ancient world gradually shifted. As new political centers emerged and transportation networks evolved, merchants increasingly favored other commercial hubs. Caravans that had once crowded Babylon's gates now followed different roads, while river traffic concentrated around newer settlements that offered greater economic advantages. Without the constant flow of trade, Babylon's prosperity began to fade. Magnificent palaces required continual maintenance, canals needed regular cleaning, and the great defensive walls demanded constant repair. As fewer people remained to support these enormous public works, the city's infrastructure slowly deteriorated, cracks appeared in ancient buildings, irrigation systems became less reliable, and once busy districts gradually fell silent. Even Babylon's sacred temples could not escape the effects of decline. For centuries, the Temple of Isagila and the towering ziggurat of Etemenanke had stood at the spiritual heart of Mesopotamia. Pilgrims had traveled great distances to honor Marduk, and priests had maintained ancient rituals passed down through countless generations. But as populations decreased and political power shifted elsewhere, temple revenues declined. Fewer worshippers arrived, fewer offerings were made, and maintaining these vast religious complexes became increasingly difficult. Nature slowly reclaimed what human hands had built. Most of Babylon's buildings were constructed primarily from mud bricks. While these materials served the ancient builders well, they required regular care to withstand rain, wind, and seasonal flooding. Once maintenance ceased, walls gradually crumbled. Roofs collapsed, streets filled with drifting sand and broken bricks, and vegetation began growing through abandoned structures. Generation after generation, the once great city quietly disappeared beneath layers of earth. Travelers passing through the region encountered scattered ruins where magnificent avenues had once stretched toward the Ishtar Gate. Towering temples became weathered mounds, and the grand palaces of Nebuchadnezzar slowly dissolved back into the Mesopotamian plain. The winds that swept across the fertile valley carried dust over abandoned neighborhoods, gently covering the remains of one of history's greatest cities. By the early centuries of the Common Era, Babylon had largely ceased to exist as a living city. Its name survived in history, religion, and legend, but its streets were no longer filled with merchants, priests, or children at play. Instead, silence settled over the ancient capital. Birds nested among broken walls, wild grasses grew where royal processions had once marched, and shifting sands concealed monuments that had inspired awe for centuries. Yet Babylon was never truly forgotten. Even after its people departed and its buildings collapsed, its memory endured through ancient texts, archaeological discoveries, and stories passed from one generation to the next. The city that had once ruled empires gradually vanished from the landscape, but it remained firmly rooted in human imagination. Babylon's decline was not the result of a single catastrophic event. It was a slow transformation shaped by changing politics, shifting trade routes, and the natural forces that eventually touch every civilization. Its ruins remind us that even the greatest cities are not immortal, but their legacy can outlive the stones from which they were built. For nearly 2,000 years after its decline, Babylon seemed to vanish from the world. The city that had once ruled empires, inspired legends, and dazzled travelers slowly disappeared beneath layers of wind-blown earth. Villages rose nearby, farmers cultivated fields where kings had once walked, and scattered mounds of mud bricks blended into the Mesopotamian landscape. To many people, Babylon became little more than a name preserved in the Bible, Greek histories, and ancient legends. Some even questioned whether the magnificent city had ever truly existed. During the 17th and 18th centuries, European travelers journeying through the Ottoman Empire occasionally visited the ruins south of modern Baghdad. They described enormous earthen mounds, broken bricks stamped with mysterious inscriptions, and fragments of ancient walls emerging from the desert. These travelers suspected they had found the remains of Babylon, but few realized the true scale of what lay buried beneath their feet. As European interest in the ancient Near East grew during the 19th century, Babylon attracted increasing attention from archaeologists, historians, and explorers eager to uncover the civilizations mentioned in classical literature and the Bible. Early excavations were often slow and difficult. The ruins covered many square kilometers, and much of the ancient city lay hidden beneath centuries of accumulated soil. Summer temperatures frequently climbed above 40 degrees Celsius, while dust storms and limited resources made archaeological work exhausting. Nevertheless, researchers continued their efforts, convinced that one of history's greatest cities was waiting to be rediscovered. The most important breakthrough came with the arrival of the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey. In 1899, Koldewey began what would become one of the longest and most significant archaeological excavations of the ancient world. Unlike many earlier explorers, who focused mainly on collecting spectacular artifacts, Koldewey approached Babylon with careful scientific methods. Every wall, street foundation, and inscription was measured, mapped, and recorded with remarkable precision. For nearly 2 decades, his team worked tirelessly beneath the scorching Mesopotamian sun. Millions of bricks were carefully uncovered by hand. Layer after layer of earth revealed the outlines of streets, temples, palaces, and defensive walls that had remained hidden for centuries. Gradually, the legendary city described by ancient writers began to emerge from the desert once again. Among Koldewey's greatest discoveries were the immense foundations of Babylon's defensive walls, confirming that the city had indeed possessed one of the largest fortification systems of the ancient world. He also uncovered extensive sections of Nebuchadnezzar II's royal palace, revealing enormous courtyards, administrative buildings, and ceremonial halls, where foreign ambassadors had once stood before the Babylonian king. Perhaps the most breathtaking discovery was the remains of the famous Ishtar Gate. Although the upper portions had long since collapsed, archaeologists uncovered thousands of brilliantly colored glazed bricks buried beneath the soil. Many still retain their vivid deep blue surfaces, despite more than 2,000 years underground. Carefully assembled reliefs of lions, bulls, and dragons emerged piece by piece, offering an extraordinary glimpse into Babylon's artistic achievements. These discoveries attracted worldwide attention. Large numbers of the original glazed bricks were transported to Germany, where archaeologists painstakingly reconstructed substantial portions of the Ishtar Gate and the adjoining processional way. Today, visitors to the Pergamon Museum in Berlin can stand before this remarkable reconstruction and experience something remarkably close to what ancient travelers would have seen when entering Babylon at the height of its glory. Koldewey's excavations also revealed the foundations of the Great Ziggurat at Temenanke, widely believed by many scholars to have inspired later traditions surrounding the Tower of Babel. Although the towering structure itself had disappeared long ago, its enormous base demonstrated the impressive scale of Babylonian religious architecture. The archaeologists uncovered parts of the Temple of Isagila, residential neighborhoods, workshops, drainage systems, canals, and administrative buildings. Thousands of inscribed clay tablets provided valuable information about daily life, commerce, religion, and government. Each discovery helped historians reconstruct a clearer picture of how Babylon's citizens had lived, worked, and worshipped thousands of years earlier. Yet one famous mystery remained unsolved. Despite years of excavation, no definitive evidence of the legendary Hanging Gardens was found. Koldewey himself proposed that certain vaulted structures near the palace might have supported the gardens, but later scholars questioned this interpretation. Other researchers suggested that the gardens may have existed elsewhere within Babylon or perhaps not in Babylon at all. The debate continues today, reminding us that archaeology often answers old questions while creating new ones. The rediscovery of Babylon transformed our understanding of ancient history. What had once been dismissed by some as exaggerated legend proved to be an extraordinary reality. Massive walls, magnificent gates, sophisticated urban planning, advanced engineering, and impressive artistic craftsmanship all confirmed that Babylon truly deserved its reputation as one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. Today, although much of Babylon still lies in ruins, its story is no longer hidden beneath the sands of Mesopotamia. Thanks to the dedication of archaeologists like Robert Koldewey and countless researchers who followed him, the lost city has emerged once more not as a place filled with kings and merchants, but as one of humanity's most important archaeological treasures, continuing to reveal its secrets to every new generation. Long after its walls crumbled and its temples fell silent, Babylon continued to live on not as a powerful empire, but as one of the most enduring symbols in human history. Few ancient cities have left such a profound mark on religion, literature, art, and popular culture. Even people who know little about Mesopotamian history have likely heard the name Babylon. Over the centuries, it has become far more than a place on a map. It has become an idea. One of the primary reasons for Babylon's lasting influence is its prominent place in the Bible. Babylon appears throughout both the Old and New Testaments, often representing far more than a historical kingdom. It is remembered as the empire that conquered the kingdom of Judah, destroyed the first temple in Jerusalem, and carried many of the Jewish people into exile during the 6th century BCE. This period, known as the Babylonian exile, became one of the defining events in Jewish history and deeply shaped the development of biblical tradition. Because of these events, Babylon came to symbolize both political power and human suffering. For the Jewish people living in exile, Babylon represented a foreign land where they longed for their homeland, while trying to preserve their faith and identity. The famous words of Psalm 137, "By the rivers of Babylon," capture this sense of longing and loss, expressing the sorrow of a people separated from their sacred city. The Bible also presents Babylon as a symbol of extraordinary wealth. Ancient writers described it as a city overflowing with riches, magnificent buildings, luxurious clothing, precious metals, and international trade. This image reflected Babylon's historical reputation as one of the wealthiest cities of the ancient world. Its grand palaces, bustling markets, and monumental architecture made it a natural symbol of earthly prosperity and imperial greatness. Yet biblical tradition also gave Babylon another meaning. In later writings, especially the Book of Revelation, Babylon became a symbol of arrogance, corruption, and moral decline. Rather than referring only to the historical city, Babylon came to represent any powerful society consumed by pride, injustice, and the abuse of power. The image of Babylon the Great serves as a warning that even the richest and strongest civilizations can fall when they place wealth and ambition above justice and humility. This symbolic meaning has endured for nearly 2,000 years. As a result, the name Babylon often appears in discussions about empires, politics, and culture far removed from ancient Mesopotamia. It has become a universal metaphor for both human achievement and human excess. Modern popular culture has embraced Babylon with equal enthusiasm. Countless films have portrayed the city as a place of unimaginable splendor, filled with towering walls, magnificent temples, royal courts, and legendary gardens. While many cinematic depictions take creative liberties with historical details, they continue to reinforce Babylon's image as one of history's most spectacular cities. Video games have also introduced Babylon to new generations. Whether serving as the setting for historical adventures, strategy games, or fantasy worlds inspired by ancient civilizations, Babylon frequently appears as a symbol of mystery, knowledge, and imperial power. Players may explore reconstructed streets, command Babylonian armies, or encounter legendary monuments such as the Ishtar Gate and the Hanging Gardens. Novelists have likewise drawn inspiration from Babylon for centuries. Historical fiction seeks to recreate daily life within the ancient city, while fantasy and adventure stories often borrow its atmosphere of mystery, grandeur, and forgotten wisdom. The Tower of Babel, the Hanging Gardens, and Babylon's mighty kings continue to inspire storytellers searching for unforgettable settings and timeless themes. Music has preserved Babylon's legacy as well. The phrase, "by the rivers of Babylon," drawn from the biblical psalm, has inspired countless musical interpretations across different genres and cultures. For some artists, Babylon represents exile and longing. For others, it symbolizes oppression, spiritual struggle, or the search for freedom. Across centuries, the ancient city's name has continued to resonate far beyond the world in which it first existed. So why does Babylon continue to captivate us? Perhaps it is because the city embodies so many powerful contrasts at once. It was both historical reality and enduring legend. It represented astonishing scientific achievement, yet also inspired stories of divine judgment. It produced remarkable architecture, advanced mathematics, and sophisticated astronomy, while simultaneously becoming a symbol of ambition, pride, and mystery. Babylon reminds us that civilizations may disappear, but their stories often outlive their stones. Empires rise and fall, monuments crumble, and generations pass away, yet certain names forever woven into humanity's collective imagination. More than 2,000 years after its decline, Babylon is no longer merely an ancient city buried beneath the sands of Mesopotamia. It has become a timeless legend, one that continues to inspire faith, curiosity, creativity, and wonder throughout the world. More than 4,000 years have passed since Babylon first emerged on the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. The mighty kings are gone. The bustling markets have fallen silent. The towering temples no longer echo with the voices of priests, and the legendary palaces have long since crumbled beneath the weight of time. Yet Babylon has not disappeared entirely. Today its ruins still stand in modern-day Iraq, offering a remarkable window into one of humanity's greatest civilizations. Located about 85 kilometers south of Baghdad, the archaeological site of Babylon stretches across a vast area along the eastern bank of the Euphrates River. At first glance, visitors may be surprised by what they see. Rather than a city filled with towering monuments, Babylon appears as a landscape of ancient foundations, weathered brick walls, excavated streets, and low earthen mounds. Centuries of erosion, human activity, and the natural decay of mud brick architecture have transformed what was once the world's greatest city into a quiet archaeological landscape. Even so, the ruins still reveal glimpses of Babylon's former magnificence. Visitors can walk along sections of the ancient processional way, where kings, priests, and pilgrims once participated in grand religious ceremonies. The massive foundations of royal palaces remain visible, allowing archaeologists to reconstruct the enormous scale of Nebuchadnezzar II's residence. Nearby stand the remains of the Temple of Isagila, once dedicated to Marduk, and the enormous foundations believed to belong to the great Ziggurat Temenanki, which many associate with the legend of the Tower of Babel. Although these structures survive only as ruins, they continue to inspire awe. Looking across the site, it is possible to imagine the towering walls, colorful gates, crowded marketplaces, and magnificent temples that once dominated the Mesopotamian skyline. Every exposed brick and excavated foundation serves as a reminder that this quiet landscape was once the beating heart of one of history's greatest empires. One of Babylon's most famous monuments, however, is no longer found in Iraq. The spectacular Ishtar Gate, with its brilliant blue glazed bricks and magnificent reliefs of lions, dragons, and bulls, was carefully excavated by Robert Koldewey's German archaeological team during the early 20th century. Large portions of the original gate were transported to Germany, where they were painstakingly reconstructed. Today, the restored Ishtar Gate stands as one of the highlights of the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, allowing millions of visitors each year to experience a masterpiece of Babylonian architecture. Meanwhile, archaeologists continue to study the original site in Iraq. Over the past century, excavations have uncovered palaces, temples, residential districts, canals, defensive walls, administrative buildings, and thousands of inscribed clay tablets. Modern technologies, including aerial photography, satellite imagery, and digital mapping, have allowed researchers to investigate areas that earlier excavations could not fully explore. Every new discovery adds another piece to the story of Babylon, helping historians better understand how the city functioned at the height of its power. Protecting Babylon, however, has not always been easy. For centuries, many of its ancient bricks were removed and reused to construct nearby villages and buildings. Seasonal flooding, wind erosion, and the natural deterioration of mud brick structures have continued to threaten the site. More recently, decades of political instability, armed conflict, and insufficient conservation resources have created additional challenges for archaeologists and preservation experts working to protect this extraordinary heritage. Recognizing Babylon's global significance, international efforts have focused increasingly on its conservation. In 2019, Babylon was officially recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, an important milestone that acknowledged its outstanding value to all humanity. This designation has encouraged greater international cooperation, scientific research, and preservation projects aimed at safeguarding the ruins for future generations. Even with UNESCO recognition, conservation remains a difficult task. Ancient mud bricks are highly vulnerable to rain, heat, and changing environmental conditions. Archaeologists must balance excavation with preservation, since exposing buried structures can sometimes accelerate their deterioration. Careful restoration, protective shelters, and long-term monitoring are essential if Babylon's remaining monuments are to survive the centuries ahead. Despite these challenges, travelers can still experience something truly remarkable. Visitors walking through Babylon today follow many of the same routes once traveled by kings, merchants, priests, and ordinary citizens thousands of years ago. They can explore reconstructed sections of the processional way, examine palace foundations, stand near the remains of ancient temples, and gaze across the broad Mesopotamian plain where one of the world's greatest cities once flourished. The silence that now fills Babylon is striking. Where thousands of voices once echoed through busy streets, only the wind moves across the ancient bricks. Yet that silence carries its own powerful message. It reminds us that even the greatest civilizations are temporary, but their achievements can continue to inspire humanity long after their cities have fallen. Today, Babylon exists not as the capital of an empire, but as one of the world's most important archaeological treasures. Its ruins continue to attract historians, researchers, and curious travelers from around the globe, inviting every visitor to step back through time and walk among the echoes of a civilization whose legacy still shapes our understanding of history. As the sun slowly sinks below the horizon, the golden light fades across the ancient plains of Mesopotamia. A gentle breeze drifts over the weathered ruins where one of the greatest cities in human history once stood. Broken walls cast long shadows across the earth, while the Euphrates continues its timeless journey, flowing quietly as it has for thousands of years. The voices of kings, merchants, priests, and builders have long since fallen silent, yet the spirit of Babylon still lingers among these ancient stones. The magnificent palaces have disappeared, the towering temples have crumbled into dust, and the legendary hanging gardens may forever remain suspended somewhere between history and myth. Yet Babylon was always more than its monuments. It was a place where laws shaped civilizations, where mathematics and astronomy reached remarkable heights, where merchants connected distant cultures, and where ideas crossed borders long before the modern world existed. Today, we have followed Babylon's extraordinary journey from a humble settlement on the fertile banks of the Euphrates to the dazzling capital of one of history's greatest empires. We witnessed the rise of Hammurabi, the glory of Nebuchadnezzar II, the mystery of the Tower of Babel and the Hanging Gardens, the arrival of Cyrus the Great and Alexander the Great, and finally the slow decline of a city that seemed destined to last forever. Though its walls eventually surrendered to time, its legacy never truly vanished. Babylon reminds us of a timeless truth. Every civilization, no matter how powerful, will one day face change. Cities may fall, empires may disappear, and monuments may return to the earth from which they were built. But knowledge, stories, discoveries, and human imagination have the power to outlive stone. They travel across generations, inspiring new minds to ask questions, seek understanding, and remember those who came before us. Perhaps that is Babylon's greatest achievement, not that it became the richest city of the ancient world, but that thousands of years later, it still invites us to wonder, to explore, and to learn. Thank you for spending this journey through history with Chronicles Chronicles. If you enjoyed today's story, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which ancient civilization, forgotten kingdom, or historical mystery would you like us to explore next? If this video sparked your curiosity, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Every subscription helps us continue uncovering the remarkable stories hidden within humanity's past. Until our next journey together, take care, stay curious, and as always, keep exploring the echoes of history one story at a time.